G'day, mate, and welcome to Friday Factorio 2, the multiplayer Megapacket. I've got good old Mojo here with me. Hey, mate.
Hello.
So, we've had an hour of getting completely sidetracked before we've even done a Friday Facts. We apologise, not really. Anyway, it's a multiplayer Megapacket.
I think everyone's disappointed they didn't get to record the pillow talk.
You probably didn't want to hear it. Anyway. We waffed enough during a normal Friday Facts. You don't need an hour of prequel to the Friday Facts. Yeah.
Completely unrelated gibberish.
Yeah. Look, I think we covered Factorio for 10 minutes of it. Anyway. So we got the multiplayer Megapacket, and I guess we've spent some time talking about it, and we're, for both of us, because we have Australian internet, and that's really the key area, we're interested whether the latency hiding, which we're going to get to further on, we're interested whether the latency hiding hides more latency than it did prior to 1754. Is that right?
I think so.
54, 52, somewhere there.
50-something.
50-something, yeah.
Let's just say 50-something is close enough, because there'll probably be a 56, 57, or 58 by the time this video goes out, or at least by the time most people have watched it.
Yeah, probably. We're just wondering if it hides the latency better, because both of us, when we're playing on EU servers, we can feel the latency, irrespective of megapackets. But yeah, anyway, that's what we're hoping for. So the megapacket itself, this is long and it's in depth, and I'm going to try and summarize it. And I've got Mojo here to definitely extend it and get us completely sidetracked. That's why we bring him along. But this
I tried, and I actually still don't quite understand it as well as it turned.
I understand it mostly, but we'll try our best. So, this is all written by Twinson, and over the last couple of months, he was joining KOS's massive multiplayer online events as a player, and he noticed after reaching a certain number of players, every few minutes, a bunch of them got dropped. And he was one of the players that got disconnected every single time, even though he had a decent internet connection. He started looking at the matter started taking the matter personally, and after 3 weeks of debugging, fixing, and testing, the issue was finally fixed. But the journey was not that easy to get there, as it always is. This is one of those.
Yeah, as it is with programming, it's never easy.
It's one of those tiny, obscure bugs, and worse than that, it's a multiplayer bug that only happens between server and client, which is probably the hardest to diagnose. It's the hardest to track down. It's the hardest to reproduce. It's just a nightmare. And that's why a lot of games you'll find, like even games that should have multiplayer in them, don't always have multiplayer if the dev team's not large enough, because multiplayer is really complicated and annoying and has lots of problems. But yeah, it led to the Megapacket. So, as Twinson said, it's under very specific network conditions, in very specific game conditions, in this case having more than 200 players. Even if you can reproduce the issue, it's impossible to properly debug. So, the short version of the bug is because the implementation of the latency state simulation, a client would sometimes end up in a situation where it sent a packet of about 400 entity selection input actions in one tick. This is what we call the Megapacket. The server not only has to correctly receive those input actions, but also send them to everybody else. This quickly becomes a problem when you have 200 clients, because it saturates the upload of the server and causes packet loss, which then causes a cascade problem where everything just gets worse from that point.
Everything just falls apart because you get the packet loss, and then it has to resend those and also reacquire the ones that it tried to send before. Because while this is going on, more inputs are coming in, so there's more megapackets forming.
Yeah.
Which is the key thing.
Yeah. So it took Twinson about 2 weeks to fix the actual issue. Probably another couple of weeks to diagnose the issue. And he's going to give us all the technical details below. Now, we're going to try and summarize this as best as possible, but we'll see how well we go. So, the basic way Factorio multiplayer works is all clients simulate the game, and they only receive and send player input called input actions. The server's responsibility is for guessing what the input actions are and make sure all the clients execute the same actions in the same tick. So What you're
And that's
seeing...
what I should take a step there to say that's what we call lockstep, where everyone simulates the same thing at the same time. That's where we call deterministic lock. So everyone moves forward at the same time,
Yeah.
and you send the actions between them and between each of the clients and the server, and they move forward together. So that's what's going on there.
Yeah, but it doesn't quite happen like that in reality, and that's where things
Yeah, and
start to get confusing.
that's where things start to fall apart, and that's what we're leading to here. Is how do you deal? Because when you say, okay, so we've lost a packet here and there, how do we deal with that? And that's what we're
Well,
leading.
it's worse than that. It's I perform an action, but the server doesn't know what that action is, and you don't know what that action is because there is a certain latency between me doing that action, sending it to the server receiving that action, and then sending that data onto you so you can receive that action. So then you have to process it sometime in the past.
Yeah, that's where when you place something down and then there's a bit of jitter and it goes up and then goes down again. That's what's going. So when you place something down, your game doesn't actually take it; it has to get it back from the server.
Yes. So when you do something exactly that, it only actually happens after you do it. It's sent. Well, you click the mouse button to put down a furnace. It's sent into your game. Your game sends it across the network to the server. The server receives it. The server sends it back to you and says, okay, you're allowed to actually have a furnace there. That's when it actually exists. So the server has to agree to your client that you're actually allowed to do something. And if it all happened like that, in reality, it would make the game really, really laggy because you'd have to always wait for the server to say, okay, you're allowed to do that. What they've done is they've actually sort of faked what you see on the screen. Basically, it's probably the best way to put it. In the latency state, so the game state is what's happened on the server. It's what the server's agreed to. It's what the server says, yes, that has actually happened. In the latency state, which is what's happening on your local side.
The difference between what's happening, I would say.
Yeah, it's what your game client has decided to do that hasn't got to the server and the server agreed to yet, basically. So in that latency state, yeah, you can do anything, and it's not sacred. It can change because for all you know, whilst you've been putting down a blueprint, somebody else has put down something else right across your blueprint, and you just
one tick before you put that furnace down, someone pasted down some belt.
Yeah, and
so
I guess the most common place you see it is when you go into your inventory and you go to pick up something from like the 5th slot down, and then things shuffle by one tile and you pick up something else out of your inventory.
Yeah, that's actually probably the best example of it because you've received it, but your client hasn't.
A bot's delivered you something, but you don't know it actually exists yet.
Yeah, because you haven't received it yet from the server.
Yeah.
But when you clicked it after, at the point in time after when it was played.
Yeah, you clicked the mouse after the server had told you that happened 3 ticks ago, but you hadn't actually seen it on your screen yet until you opened your inventory and actually done the click.
Because remember, because the click that you do in your inventory has to be sent to the server. So by the time the bot's delivered the thing, it's come down in the time it took for yours to go up and then back again.
Yeah. So on the client,
move swiftly along.
Yeah. So on the client side of Factorio, we apply all the input actions of all the players into the game state as they're received from the server. We delete all the input actions. So these are things that you've told the game to do, and they're in a queue. Is this right? Yeah. So when you tell the game to do something, it goes into a game queue and then it's to be sent to the server. So in one round trip, you tell the server you tell the server what you're going to do. It goes to the server. The server then okays that, so you delete that latency state that you had.
That entry in the latency state.
Yeah, that entry in the latency state, that's even better. And then, along with the server, tells you anything other players have done. And then all new actions go into a new latency state. And then
the bottom of the queue, first in, first out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally your game renders everything that's happened. In that time it's taken to do one loop, which, look, what is it? Like, most servers have a latency of like 30 odd ticks, 30 to
Something like
60
that, yeah.
ticks. So
Varies.
that's
Well, it
half a
depends,
second
because
to
you're
a...
talking about Europe, so you're on the extreme end there. Normally it'd be down in the 5 to 12.
Oh, look, 5 to 60 ticks, anywhere in that sort of range. So
that's reasonable.
So you're from just behind, at which point you probably never notice it, to up to 60 ticks. 60 ticks is a whole second behind.
Yeah, so you probably see something after 2 seconds there.
Yeah. Yeah, when you do something, the server doesn't agree that it actually exists for 2 whole seconds, because it's got to get to the server and back at the top end. At the low end, yeah, it's almost instant. So that's just the start process, and it gets more complicated. So, to account for the unreliable nature of internet connections and crap internet outright, when the server detects what... So there are skip ticks. So when the server detects what input actions have to be executed in what game tick, if it does not have the input actions of a certain player because of a lag spike, it will not wait, but instead tells that client, I didn't do your input actions now, I'll do them later when you send them to me. And it means it doesn't slow down the server for the slowest player, which is really, really important, because there are so many people with potato PCs that would just kill most servers.
It would. Oh, were you around for version 13? That
Yes.
reminds me.
Yes.
Do you remember those days?
No, because I had a good PC at 13. But yes.
So you never played multiplayer where people's PCs, potato PCs, used to slow down the game?
Yes, I did.
Where the thing would go slow right down and stutter.
I'd have people join in on a server that was running fine at like 60 UPS, and it would suddenly crash down to 15 because somebody with a
choppy and horrible.
Yep. So on top of that, on top of the skip ticks, we've got a round trip latency. The server tries to guess what the round trip delay between the client and the server is. Every 5 seconds, it will negotiate a new latency with the client, if necessary, based on how a connection behaved in the past, and the round trip latency will be increased or decreased accordingly. So that's why we realized, only after reading these photo facts, is the multiplayer statistics, which both of us, when we're playing online, have that on the screen normally when we're streaming and recording. It
updates every 5 seconds.
Yeah, it updates every 5 seconds. It tells you basically what your latency to the server is on average in the last 5 seconds.
In that interval.
Yeah. So far this is fairly straightforward. But yeah, even though it's fairly straightforward and the core logic starts to become fairly unwieldy when you end up having connection issues with either one player or multiple players, and with being this what this all came from, a MMO event with 200 players, it really falls in that edge case, and you start seeing more bugs more often. The server and latency queue need to probably inject a special input action. So when you start having players fall behind, you'll get this special input action, which is stop movement in the next tick. And you've probably been on a server before where you've just stopped moving, you can't move, can't do anything. You'd notice you're probably in jumps. That is that command right there. It stops you moving. It's hopefully to prevent you from running into a train. 9 times out of 10, I tend to find it happens when you happen to be on the train tracks, not just before,
always, yes.
Not just after. It's whilst you're on the train tracks. That's when you pause and you're just standing there with a train and you know it's coming, you can see it coming, you're like, hopefully I get to move, but we don't know, we have to wait to catch up. So, after we've got all that, we've got one more complication to add, which is your entity selection. One of the input actions types we send is the entity selection change, which tells everybody what entity the player has their mouse over, which I'm not sure why this is sent. But I can imagine it's part of the core Factorio code, and it's there for some important reason that I don't understand. But it's the most common input action sent to the client, so it's optimized to use as little space as possible to save bandwidth. The way this was done is basically takes your XY coordinates on your screen of where you've got your mouse pointer and just works out the variable difference between last tick and next tick, which, because the whole game is deterministic from the start to the end, it works fine, in theory.
In theory.
In theory.
But, you can see there's an obvious problem brewing.
Oh yes, yes. There's always a problem when you rely on the last piece of data and the next piece of data. This is why, in the past, and we're going back a while now, but in the past, the video encoding method used to save every single frame, which used a lot of bandwidth. Now we have video encoding that uses.
It's funny, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, what was in the last frame.
Example.
Yeah, what is in the last frame, we just changed it for this frame, which works great until you have a bit of corrupted data, at which point you lose everything until there's a scene change.
Until the next iframe comes around.
Or iframe, yeah. Although there's some encoding methods that really dump and don't use many iframes and just rely on scene changes. You know? I don't know about YouTube.
YouTube's better than it used to be with this sort of thing, because you can only seek on MPEG 2 and MPEG 4, or MPEG, all of them that do this. You can only seek to iframes. So if you have a seek resolution of like 2 seconds, that's where the iframes are. Normally it's like 12 for DVD, 12 to 15 normally, up to 1 for HD stuff for TV.
Yeah,
tended to do for MPEG 2, and then MP4. 1 second is pretty standard.
Yeah.
The more frequent they are, the more space it takes up, because it's basically it's an uncompressed image, so you want as few of them as possible.
At that single point, it tells you what every single pixel on the screen is, and it's not determining from the last pixel. Yeah. So I
think Twitch accepts it demands them once every 4 seconds.
I think so. Maybe that's B frames. Anyway, see,
they're the regular ones, the difference frames.
Oh,
they're bidirectional, because it can tell you where the difference is both ways, and there's P's which are, and anyway.
Tangent already.
Tangent.
Yeah. So it requires.
It is with that crap.
It creates 2 important requirements. Input actions can never be skipped, and they need to be executed in the correct order, so you know where your mouse pointer is going to be. These requirements are met for the game state, but since the purpose of the latency state, back to the start, is to look good enough for the player, these requirements were not met. So if you're in a latency state, which everybody is technically all the time, because the game state only technically exists on the server, where your mouse pointer is, only
is where
your mouse pointer is on your screen only looks good enough for your screen, because it's in that latency state, whereas the game state technically only exists on the server. So this is when things start to go wrong. So the latency state was sometimes not holding the correct information because the game state had changed, but the latency state didn't know about it at that time. So the Megapacket got generated something like this. A player has a connection issue. Happens all the time. Skip ticks and round-trip latency adjustment mechanics start to kick in. So because there's skip ticks, the game sort of starts to slow down. You have that player stops moving wherever that was in the
player stops and stutters, and then the game starts accumulating action.
Well, on top of that, the server decides that your latency, has been this
not processing your actions, so stop.
Well,
so skip tick.
It stops you moving. It stops you processing new actions. It also stops you moving and renegotiates that rather than you being 30 milliseconds behind or 30 ticks behind, you're now potentially 60, potentially 120, because you've had some sort of multiplayer, some sort of internet problem. Latency start queue doesn't account for these mechanisms. This leads to some actions being deleted prematurely or executed in the wrong order, leading to incorrect latency state. So this is all happening client side. It doesn't really matter too much in theory, because you're going to get the correct game state from the server itself.
Eventually,
yeah. Player recovers from his connection issue and simulates up to 400 ticks in order to cache up with the server again. So your internet problem stops. Obviously the person that walked through your Wi-Fi signal has finally got out of the way, and suddenly you're back up and in the game, and you set off all the 400 ticks or 400 ticks worth of information to the server at once. For every tick, a new entity selection change actions generate and prepared to be sent to the server. So that's all done. Client sends to the server a Megapacket with 400 entity selection changes. This is what's what your mouse has been over for the last 400 ticks, and other actions.
Or up to 400 ticks. That's the thing I was looking at trying to find. Was getting caught up before because you were insisting that it was 6 seconds worth, so it's a big stop. Whereas I was saying, oh, not necessarily. It's just however you've accumulated 400.
Yeah,
it's up to 400. So 400 is worst case because I think that's the hard limit that a game has before it does other mechanisms.
Yeah, probably. It was something we were talking about in the Palo Talk beforehand. We weren't sure if...
Yeah, the wording's a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, 400 ticks is 6.5 seconds.
Yeah,
and
it may not necessarily be 400 ticks, however.
No, it might be 400 input actions, which is this number 6 here, which is potentially like, you know, you moving forward, you shooting a gun, you in combat, all that sort of stuff, and where your mouse happens to be for 200 ticks or whatever it happens to be. But yeah, client sends the server a Megapacket with 400 bits of data, and then the server receives all 400 input actions, has to process them in order, even if they've happened in the past, and then executes, well, tells all the clients to execute those exact same commands, potentially in the past, and sends them over the network, which then...
do you know what I reckon it is? The game, if it doesn't receive a packet from the client in 400 ticks, it probably just drops them from the game. That's what it'll be.
6
that's
seconds?
Yeah,
probably.
I reckon that's what it is.
So
I should look it up.
The mechanism is supposed to save some network bandwidth, mainly being where your mouse pointer was and what you were physically doing. End up creating potentially massive network packets. In the end, the problem was solved by fixing all edge cases, updating and maintaining the latency queue, which took a lot of time. So now they're actually going to make sure everything's in the latency queue. And it was probably better that they did it properly rather than doing some quick hacks. Yeah, they could have just said, look, rather than being 400 ticks being 6.5 seconds, we'll halve it. It should halve the problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of little hacky things you can do, but it's probably the key point there is worth appreciating is they spent the time to really hunt down the root cause and actually solve it.
2 weeks just fixing the problem properly, and it's one of those things that we really respect Woob for doing. Yeah, they fix bugs properly rather than just putting a coat of paint on it and say good enough. Again, we both play Oxygen Not Included. They're about to hit final release sometime in the next week or two, and there's still major bugs in the code from...
Oh yeah, so that's a classic example of a game where you can load the game 5 times and you get 5 different results.
Actually, turns out you can with Satisfactory as well. I was trying to get the manta, the big flying manta ray in one spot, and I saved the game when I was happy with it. I turned around, loaded it, it wasn't there. I loaded it again, it wasn't there. I loaded it again, it wasn't there. I loaded it, set a timer, watched the manta ray approach, reloaded the game, started the exact same timer. After the exact same 5 minutes, hadn't shown up. So, again... So
was it respawning it in a new location? Or
it's obviously on a new location in its set path every single time you load the game.
Oh yeah, because it's part of the level data.
It is.
I think that only Satisfactory only saves the objects you put into the world. It doesn't actually save anything about the level itself.
No, because anything you blow up is saved. So obviously... Oh
yeah, like rocks and such, and to a lesser extent trees. Although they're objects in the world as well. So yeah.
Obviously all the animals in Satisfactory are not saved as part of the game state. They're randomly placed onto their paths, possibly when you load the game. So in the case of Factorio, if you've got biter nests everywhere with biters out there about to charge off to your base and you save the game, you reload it, they're still going to be there. Satisfactory... If you load the game and you see there's some really nasty spitters off in the distance, save it, reload it. Chances are those spitters might not be there when you reload the game.
You made me think of a certain video which starts with a certain Factorio player standing next to a car, zooming off into biters.
Okay.
Like 2015 or 2014, that video. Yeah, you can't save and reload that one and get a different result. It's the same biters every time.
Yep. And then finally, we've got the Clusterio gridlock, or Clusterio, the gridlock cluster. So, this is something that I took a part in, you took a part of.
We all took a part in last year, which was the original Clusterio map. where we had all these different. It was different. All these different servers which were dedicated to different tasks, all working towards the 60k signs a minute.
Yeah.
60,000 signs a minute.
Which was massive and agonizing, and we had to optimize everything so much because the servers couldn't always keep up with people's PCs. But then again, there were some servers that were better than people's home PCs, and there were a couple of servers I couldn't even get on because they ran
That was a good time, actually, because I think my current PC was still pretty new then, and my PC could keep up with all of the, was faster than all of the...
Yeah. Yeah, well...
Actually, no, there was one or two that wasn't. There were some mining worlds that were...
Yeah, there were some massive worlds. So, basically, what had happened is, yeah, as Mojo said, we had worlds dedicated to, like, mining, other worlds dedicated to smelting, other worlds dedicated to just making one science pack. You'd load onto a world, and there'd be nothing but machines making...
Green science pack.
Green science, or red science,
and then there's the green circuit world, where there was multiple of those.
Yeah, there's multiple planets, and pretty much planets just making nothing but green circuits. So what actually happened is it was cloud-based. So you'd mine iron ore or whatever, and you'd dump it into a magic chest, which would take it off to the cloud. You could then go to another world, have another magic chest that would bring that iron ore off the cloud, put it in the real world, let you smelt it, and then put the smelted plate back in the cloud. So that was that event. Bit over 12 months ago. I should
also just point out, because it was a point of contention, was that you couldn't put the chest anywhere. There was a boundary in the center of the spawn where you could put...
I think it was 200 tiles by 200 tiles, 500
something
tiles
like that,
by 500
yeah. It wasn't very big. It was enough to get some train unloads in. You basically had to train stuff in or build stuff in or mod stuff in. However you got them in. But
trains, bots, whatever.
So you couldn't just have chests which just spawn stuff in and then you do stuff with it and throw it back out again. Because
we'd look at that and you'd end up with chests literally on the ore patch with miners going straight into the chests. That would be a little bit too much. But yeah, they're doing a new event. Now, this time around, it's called the Gridlock Cluster. I don't actually have a nice picture.
not on hand.
No, I don't have a nice picture currently.
Well, the idea anyway, yeah, it works. So yeah, it starts off with a single world, and then it can only connect to its neighbor.
Yes,
and then it expands from there.
I think the best thing I can think of is if you have an average player playing Tetris where none of the lines have been taken out and some places have empty blocks, it's pretty much how we're going for this one. So there are some worlds that can connect to other worlds by they neighbor one another. There's also dead zones where two servers just... There's a gap between two worlds, so you can't move straight from one world to another. You've got to pass through a different world. And on top of that, this time around, we're using trains. So there's no magic chests that take things off to the cloud.
There's no magic teleporting to the cloud. It's all trains.
It's all trains, which will literally move from server A through server B, out the other side of server B onto server C.
Yeah, and that is where it gets really ridiculous. Like, this is just nuts, mind-blowing stuff.
This is, if you've ever had a horrible, horrible, horrible train deadlock, you might not even be on the server you're currently on. It might be on a completely different server.
You could have a deadlock that spans multiple servers.
Yes,
like that's next level train deadlock, right?
Yes. So it's open to all players. There is a lovely Reddit link there which has all the details. I was actually part of the write-up for this one about 12 months ago, actually. Is when
this is how long this train mod
it's
has
taken
been in development.
Godmave, I want to say.
I think that was the name.
Godmave! There we go.
Yeah, it is.
Godmave, it's taken him that long to get the train teleportation mod to actually work with Clusterio. And actually work outright. He released the mod some time ago. I actually spoke to him
last year. The prototype was out.
Prototype was out, but actually went on to the mod portal after 17 was released because he needed some plugins to actually get it to work better, or he needed some more APIs to get it to work better. Even then, it still had problems. It has been updated since. I think it works. Well, I know in a single player it works 99% of the time, and for Clusterio, we're hoping it works 99% of the time. There are test servers up now. shh, I'm not meant to tell you about that. You can go join them and start playing around with the new Clusterio servers.
You have to be don't forget you have to be whitelisted too.
You have to be whitelisted. Actually, yeah, that's an important thing. So the way they're doing this, actually, not all servers. So the way you have to get onto the servers, you need to, one, go read the big long Reddit wall of text. It's actually really informative. It's really, really important that you read it to get all the information, especially important things like your inventory syncs from server to server, which is going to be really, really important. Along with, you have to apply to get whitelisted. The reason why they do a whitelist is it means you don't have to worry about passwords for all the different servers. You can just automatically join. The server knows that you're allowed to join. I do believe they will have, same as last time, they will have servers that are dedicated that don't need whitelisting, where people can prove themselves if they haven't already applied and gone through the actual whitelisting process. I think that's it. Yeah, and you can get,
yeah, that's it.
You can get on the whitelist that way. And if you,
I know.
Yep.
I think, is this true? I don't know if this is true. You might need to confirm or deny it. If people who were whitelisted on Clusterio last year,
yep, they're already pre-approved. Yeah.
So if you're on Clusterio, then you're already approved.
Yeah, and if you're part of one of the many communities currently, so I've had a lot of people in my community that are already whitelisted. Factorio MMO communities should be completely whitelisted. Redmere community should be whitelisted. Explosive Gaming, who I'm a modder of, should be. If you're in that community, you should be whitelisted as well. Comfy Factorio should be whitelisted. And Project 74, which I don't know anything about, so maybe they're whitelisted as well.
Who were they?
Probably the first Russian-speaking community to present itself in a Clusterio event. There you go.
Oh, there you go. They were the Russians.
There you go.
Nice.
And yeah, if you're bored, you can go back to the playlist, which I'll include down in the description, and watch the original Clusterio event, and get into 60,000 science packs, which actually end up getting to 100,000 science packs, which is funny.
Did it get to 120?
Maybe it got to 120, but literally there was one planet that was nothing but labs and beacons.
Yeah, I remember that. It was because I had to get it off Nexus because it was too laggy for Nexus.
Yeah, it killed. So the original server was meant to be a make everything and labs, and the server couldn't keep up with doing a make everything and labs. So labs got moved over to their own server, which did nothing but processing science.
Admittedly, the server also couldn't keep up with doing a little bit of make everything and a lot of JD with a decon.
No, I didn't decon too much. And
map.
Actually, no, there was another server. I think we ended up going to a dedicated server to make satellites. Yes, there was one server
as well
that just made satellites, because you'd be surprised at how hard it is to make like 120 satellites per minute. If you just look at the number of radars you need, that's your first problem. It's a lot of radars, and trying to get.
Think of it also because that's 100. Like, well, the 60,000. That's 60,000. What is it? 60 rockets 60,000.
60,000 is 60 rockets per minute. It's satellite per second.
Yeah, satellite per second. I got my brain tangle tied. So yeah, that's 60 rockets a set. 60 rockets a minute is a lot of rockets. And then you double that to 120. That's even more. I just remember seeing the rocket silo world, and it's just the rockets flying up constantly.
Yep, they're all down one side of the world. Actually, like I said, go look at the playlist. I actually toured all the worlds right at the end. There's Nexus. I have no idea what the rocket world was called.
Vandenberg.
Vandenberg?
Yeah, because Vandenberg missile base, rocket base, whatever it is. It's like how Mordor was smelting.
Yeah, I got China, I've got Mordor, Detroit.
You should have had Shenzhen, China for green circle.
I don't have Shenzhen because I couldn't get on Shenzhen.
And what was a difficult one to get onto?
Shenzhen. No, I've got Shenzhen. There we go. I got Drop Bear, which is the Australian one, and Blue Scope, which was the Australian one.
The other one. Blue Scope had the big steel.
Vandenberg. There's Vandenberg.
There you go.
Yeah, Oh, yeah, I remember the steel smelter. Oh, God. All right, anyway, that is it for the Friday Facts. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to link to the original Clusterio playlist that, down below. There is maybe 4 days worth of content if you want to sit there and hit the play button and just watch, because there's hours and hours of live stream. And in the meantime, the Clusterio event starts next week, actually. Yes, and I should be there hopefully to start, even though it's at like 3 a.m. local time. Which means Mojo won't be there. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
I'll be on a bit later. So if you're there, I'll join you.
It's school holidays here. I actually have no kids, so yeah, I'll be there at 4 a.m. because I can, and it'll probably be middle of the day for me, knowing that my sleeping schedule will be that far out of whack. Anyway, that's it from us. Thank you guys so much for sitting here for another Friday Facts number 302 with us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.